Part I, The Train of Fate. On the morning of the 22nd of October 1895, the port town of Granville awoke in a thin coastal mist. The train whistle sounded in the distance, long and loud, signaling the departure of Express 56 to Paris. This was a familiar train for coastal residents. Every day, it brought fresh seafood, goods, and merchants to the capital, then returned in the evening, a rhythm as regular as the heartbeat of the economy. But that morning, there was a slight delay, just a few minutes, and that small delay would become fate. On the Granville platform, passengers jostled. A man carried a leather suitcase, inside which were probably invoices and business papers. A mother held a small child wrapped in a woolen scarf, worried by the cold early winter wind. A group of young soldiers laughed loudly, backpacks on their shoulders, pieces of bread in their hands. Children were excited at the thought of seeing the glittering Eiffel Tower in Paris. Everyone boarded the gleaming carriages, not knowing that this journey would go down in history in the most tragic way. At the head of the train stood Guillaume-Marie Pellerin, a 47-year-old train driver, his gray hair damp with sweat. More than 20 years of experience had trained him to be precise and disciplined. Pellerin was not a man to be distracted. He knew every curve, every bridge span, every station stop on the Granville-Paris line. And he also knew that, in the eyes of the Ouest Railway Company, nothing was more important than punctuality. A late train meant a reprimand, public embarrassment, even the loss of his job. The pressure hung over his shoulders like a shadow. Beside Pellerin was the train's engineer, a thin man, busily shoveling coal into the fire chamber. With each stroke, a crackling sound erupted, the red light illuminated his face, and the giant steam engine shuddered like a powered iron beast. The heat mixed with the smell of grease and the screeching of metal filled the engine compartment. Outside, white smoke poured from the chimney, drifting in long streaks across the misty sky. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, the train shook violently, then slowly rolled. More than 12 heavy cars lined up, carrying more than 130 people and their goods. A little girl leaned her face against the window, her tiny, dewy hand drawing a fish on the glass. Her father sat next to her, smiling, whispering, "This afternoon, I will eat fresh fish in Paris." That simple promise would never come true. The Granville-Paris line was more than 300 kilometers long, passing through the green Normandy countryside, vineyards, and red-roofed villages. The train rushed forward, the iron wheels grinding on the rails, creating a steady music. Inside the carriage, passengers chatted, read newspapers, sipped coffee from a thermos. A businessman opened Le Figaro, shaking his head slightly at the political news, while the woman beside him hurriedly finished writing a letter. The atmosphere was like any other journey, both peaceful and urgent, when everyone believed that technology would get them back to Paris on time. But for Pellerin, every minute of delay was an obsession. Granville Station had left a few minutes late, and he was determined to make up for it. He pulled the lever, the steam spewed out, the speed increased. "We'll be back on time," he told himself, his eyes glued to the track stretching out before him. With each kilometer, the needle on the pressure gauge jumped slightly, the engine growled louder. A passenger listened, murmuring, "The train is going faster than usual." But then he shrugged. It was only express, and express meant to be fast. Through each small town, the train flew like an iron wind. At each station, a few staff members stood at attention, saluting, surprised to see the train pass by faster than they were used to. Overhead, thick clouds gathered, signaling rain. But inside the carriages, children were still giggling, soldiers were still singing a military song, and merchants were still taking notes. No one suspected that they were in the belly of destiny. About halfway through the journey, it began to rain. Cold raindrops lashed against the windows, shimmering in streams. Pellerin pulled the control lever, keeping the speed high. The mechanic glanced at him occasionally, wanting to remind him of the speed, but then remained silent. Everyone knew the pressure of time. Everyone understood. If we are late, we will be reprimanded. In that silence, the wheels were still turning. The coals were still glowing red. In a third-class compartment, an old woman whispered a prayer, fingering her rosary. She was not afraid of the train, but something was unsettling. The vibrations, the screeching, the roaring, everything seemed more urgent, more intense. A boy sitting nearby looked at her and asked, "Are you scared?" She just shook her head. "No, but it sounds like God wants us to go too fast." Late afternoon, the train approached Paris. It was past 3 p.m., only a few minutes to Montparnasse. Passengers began to pack up their belongings, adjust their coats and hats. Children pressed their faces against the windows, hoping to see the dome of the capital appear. Soldiers straightened their belts, merchants folded their newspapers and stuffed them into their pockets. Outside, suburban houses gradually appeared, smoke from the chimneys swirling into the sky. The train rushed forward, carrying with it all the confidence that a normal day would end in a familiar Parisian afternoon. But in the cab, Pellerin frowned. The clock read 3:55 p.m., only 5 minutes to enter Montparnasse station, and he knew he was still late. He pulled the control lever, one more time. The pressure needle jumped. The train roared, shaking more violently. The mechanic hesitated for a moment, then shoveled coal into the furnace again. They knew this last moment would decide, on time or late. No one knew that this decision had put hundreds of people, an entire city, right in the heart of an accident that would be remembered forever. Part 2. Approaching Paris. The evening was falling on the outskirts of Paris. Train 56 from Granville rushed like a steel arrow through the last stretches of countryside. The empty fields gave way to scattered villages, the chimneys of factories belching gray smoke, signaling that the capital was just ahead. In the sky, low clouds hung low. The last light of day cast a gloomy yellow over the tracks, making the scene seem like it was immersed in a thin veil of a dream. Guillaume-Marie Pellerin sat rigidly in the driver's seat, his eyes glued to the tracks. His watch read 15:55. Late. He gritted his teeth. He was thinking not only about this train, but also about his reputation, his career, his responsibility to the Oist company. Punctuality is honor, people used to say at the station. For a train driver, that was an order. He pulled the lever, the engine roared, steam spurted out, shaking the entire engine. Beside him, the mechanic bent over the fire, sweat dripping down his face. Each shovelful of coal was like an urge. He looked up, about to say something, but met Pellerin's steely gaze. The train driver didn't need advice, he just needed speed. The mechanic silently threw more coal, letting the fire in the belly of the iron monster continue to roar. In the cars, passengers clearly felt the change. Glass cups shook with each beat, signaling an increase in speed. A businessman stopped talking, glanced out the window. Electric poles and rows of trees passed by faster than usual. He frowned. They're going unusually fast. A mother holding her small child gently tightened her blanket. A child shouted with delight, "The plane is here, Mom." The children's laughter mixed with the terrifying screech of iron. In the third-class carriage, a brakeman, a young man in his 20s, was twisting the steel brake lever. He sensed something was wrong. The needle was not moving as it should. He tried to turn it, sweat beading on his temples. He jotted down in his notebook, "Handbrake hard, not engaging immediately, need more force, strange." That short scribbled line would later become evidence of a fateful moment. But at the moment, amid the rumble of the train, no one paid attention. A long whistle echoed as the train passed Issy-les-Moulineaux, where Paris was visible on the horizon. The roofs were taller, the streets were more crowded, the church bells mixed with the sound of horse-drawn carriage horns. Passengers were bustling, preparing their luggage. Some adjusted their hats, wrapped their scarves, ready to get off at Montparnasse station in a few minutes. They did not know that those few minutes would be the difference between life and death. In the cab, Pellerin squinted. The track ahead was straight, leading into the main station. He knew this section well. If he slowed down from a distance, the train would enter the station smoothly, stopping on the right line. But time was running out. Every second that passed was like a knife cutting into his pride. He pulled the lever again, regardless. "We must be on time," he muttered, as if to himself. The wind whistled through the cracks in the door. Steam spewed out in gasps. The mechanic glanced at the pressure gauge, which jumped up, his brows furrowed. He knew the speed was dangerous, but he also knew it was useless to argue with Pellerin now. He could only hold on tight, praying that the rails and brakes would do the rest. In the compartment, unease spread like an invisible scent. An old woman was praying, her lips murmuring prayers. A soldier stopped singing, looking straight ahead in silence. A young girl held her hat tighter, her eyes fixed on the floor. The music of steel and steam was no longer a triumphant song, but the drumbeat of an impending tragedy. The hour hand moved to 16. Montparnasse station was only a few hundred meters away. The brakeman tried to turn it one last time, his muscles tensing. But the wheels kept spinning, still shaking, still screaming. He shouted loudly in the car, "No, the brakes won't work." But the shout was drowned out by the sound of metal. No one could hear clearly. Outside, the marble dome of Montparnasse was visible. Hundreds of people were waiting for their loved ones, buying tickets, walking around the large hall. On the Rue de Rennes, newspaper vendors were shouting loudly. Children were playing on the porch. Carriages were lined up. Everything was normal, as Paris always is. Bustling, trusting, unaware of the approaching iron monster, refusing to stop. At the last moment, Pellerin put his whole body on the brake lever, exerting all his strength. The mechanic also pressed harder. The wheels screeched. Sparks flew from metal to steel, but the train was too fast. The inertia of the 12 cars, of hundreds of tons of goods and people, had exceeded its limit. The whistle blew again, long and mournful, like a final scream. Montparnasse station opened up before him. There was no way back. The train did not slow down, but rushed straight into the main hall. In that moment, all the passengers felt the same thing. They had crossed the rails of safety and entered the threshold of tragedy. Part 3. The Crash. Parisian afternoon, the 22nd of October 1895. Montparnasse station was crowded as usual. In the main hall, a long line of people stood before the ticket counter. A few passengers had just gotten off the old train, dragging their suitcases out, their shoes clacking on the stone floor. The station attendants in blue uniforms were busy, calling out train names, guiding passengers. Outside, the Rue de Rennes was bustling. Horse-drawn carriages were passing by, street vendors were selling hot bread, children were playing on the terraces. No one knew that in a few seconds, a scene would be etched into the history of this city. Exactly at 16, a long whistle sounded, tearing the space. People looked up, surprised. From the end of the platform, the train from Granville appeared. Normally at this point, the train would slow down, the rattling of the wheels slowing down. But today, it rushed in like a steel arrow, its speed not decreasing at all. In an instant, all the sounds merged together. The screeching of steel, the sound of wheels tearing up the rails, the screams resounding. Pellerin pressed the brakes, the mechanics gripped the levers, but the 100-ton monster could not stop. The engine crashed straight into the station hall. The ticket counter was thrown up, wood and glass shattered. A marble wall shook, cracked. People standing nearby fell, screams of horror echoed throughout the iron dome. In the dim light of the afternoon, the giant black steel mass rose up like a whale lost in the wrong ocean. Not stopping there, the locomotive broke through the iron railing, shattered the glass door, and then continued on, as if pushed by an invisible hand. And then, in the dead silence of it all, it emerged, hanging precariously from the station facade. The people on the Rue de Rennes stood transfixed. For a moment that seemed endless, they saw the steam engine, white smoke, wheels still spinning, pointing straight down the street like a spear. The iron mass hung in the air, held by a few cars behind that were still holding it. Then there was a loud cracking sound. One wheel fell, hitting the stone floor, sending up a cloud of white dust. Maria Gustin Aguilard, the newspaper vendor, was standing right under the porch, holding a stack of new newspapers. She couldn't avoid it. The engine, along with the falling debris, crushed the small stall. The screams of the witnesses echoed, drowning out the hissing of the steam. In a heartbeat, from a normal afternoon, Paris had turned into a chaotic picture of steel, smoke, and blood. In the station hall, passengers fell and collided with each other. Children screamed, adults called for help. Shards of glass, broken wood, and cracked stone were scattered everywhere. A police officer ran over, shouting, "Back off," as he made his way to rescue those trapped. The station attendants sounded the alarm, but every sound now only added to the chaos. In the cars behind, passengers clung to each other. The collisions caused several cars to jump and shake violently. A man banged on the glass door, his arm bleeding, shouting for his son who had been lost in the crowd. An old woman fell to her knees, holding her head, whispering prayers. Out in the street, a crowd gathered, some frightened, some curious. Many could not believe their eyes. The giant train now lay precariously on the stone facade, half inside the station, half outside, its wheels suspended in midair. White columns of steam billowed out, covering the whole neighborhood as if Montparnasse had become a battlefield. In the hazy atmosphere, an image appeared. A steam locomotive weighing tens of tons, pointing its nose down at the busy street, its rear wheels pinned by the train car behind it. It was like a wounded monster, half inside and half outside, growling helplessly. People stared in shock, both terrified and unable to look away. The minutes that followed were hell. Firefighters rushed in, along with police and doctors. Hammers, crowbars, screams calling for relatives. The injured were pulled from the pile of bricks and stones, blood smeared on the floor. A baby was carried out, its face smeared with smoke, its eyes wide open and lifeless. People passed around bandages, water, and prayers, and high above, the train still hung, a testament to the fragility of industrial pride. Every puff of steam, every turn of the wheel, was a reminder that just one mistake, 1 minute late, one decision to pull the lever, was enough to deepen Paris's tragedy. That day, apart from injuries and panic, there was only one death. But that death, an anonymous newspaper vendor on the street, became a symbol. Because she was the only victim outside the railway system, not on the train, not aware of the pressure of the hour, and not choosing, the accident had come to her like fate. A few hours later, when the smoke cleared, the crowd gathered even more. People talked, pointed, trembled. A few reporters grabbed their cameras, capturing the moment. The train engine pointing down the street, the crowd below. That photo, printed the next day in the newspaper, turned the Montparnasse accident into a legend. Part IV Aftermath. The white smoke had not yet cleared when the Montparnasse clock struck 4 times. In the midst of its steady ringing, chaos still filled the station hall. Injured passengers lay scattered, some groaning, some motionless, and those lucky enough to stand still, dazed, their eyes fixed on the huge black steel mass hanging in the sky like an open wound of the city. The Paris firefighters were the first to arrive. Alarm bells rang throughout the district. Horse-drawn ladder carts and water hoses rushed in, iron wheels grinding on the cobblestones. They rushed into the smoke, their faces wrapped in wet towels, hammers and crowbars in their hands. People heard the clang of metal, the loud shouts, "Écartez-vous, reculez!" Get out! Back! But the crowd had already gathered around the station, both frightened and drawn by the unprecedented sight. A steam locomotive, hanging in the air, as if defying gravity. Doctors and nurses also rushed in. Rough wooden stretchers were laid out on the Rue de Rennes. The wounded were brought out one by one, a merchant with a bloody forehead, a mother holding a fainted child, a soldier with a broken leg screaming. The cries mingled with the cries for help, turning Montparnasse into an open-air hospital. In the crowd, ordinary Parisians rushed to help. Some pulled boards, others bandaged themselves with coats, others gave water to the survivors. Children covered their ears and cried, while their parents trembled, trying to calm them but unable to hide their shock. When the body of Marie Augustine Aguillard was found under the debris, the air fell silent. She was a poor newspaper woman who stood on this street corner every afternoon selling Le Petit Journal, Gil Blas, or Le Figaro. Her sudden death was like a knife to the heart of the city. People whispered, "She didn't take the train, she had nothing to do with it." But the railway found her. Some women covered their faces with scarves, sobbing. Men stood still, hats in hand, heads bowed in silence. That night, Montparnasse station was sealed off. Police had put up a cordon to keep the crowd from rushing in, but they couldn't stop the curiosity. Thousands of people still gathered around, silently looking into the darkness where the train still hung. Oil lamps cast shadows on the black iron, making it look like a monster in a tragic theater. The next morning, Paris woke up in a tremors. Every cafe, every street corner, talked only about the Montparnasse accident. People were passing around the first printed copies. Le Petit Journal published a photograph taken from the Rue de Rennes, the engine pointing down, the wheels hovering, the smoke like clouds. The photo spread throughout the city in a few hours, pasted on walls, hung in bookshops, passed around in markets. It shook Paris, for the first time, people could see the fragility of modernity in its true light. The newspapers ran shocking headlines. The accident of the century at Montparnasse? Steam betrays man. The desire for speed and the price it pays. In the cafes of the Latin Quarter, intellectuals argued. Some thought it was just a personal mistake, a train driver too hasty. But others saw beyond it. No, this is a sign. We thought we had mastered steel and steam, but we are only riding an untamed beast. Parisian artists and painters quickly took up their pens. In their Montmartre studios, sketches of the suspended locomotive were made, adding a touch of surrealism. The steam turned into dark clouds, the wheels like monster eyes. Poets wrote metaphors. The iron beast roars in the heart of Paris, divided by the arches crack, the stones groan, the people weep divided by who drives, who is driven. Meanwhile, at Montparnasse, the cleanup took days. The locomotive had to be lowered using pulleys and large cables. Each time the cables were stretched, the steel block vibrated. and the crowd held its breath. We watched the train fall slowly, still puffing smoke, as if it did not want to leave that wall, wrote one witness in his diary. When it hit the ground, dust flew up, and many people cheered, but it was a mixture of relief and fear. The hole in the station facade was covered, but weeks later, people still came to Rue de Rennes just to look. They pointed, told their friends, their children, as if it were a ritual. Here, they said, the train fell. Here a woman died. The Montparnasse accident left more than just a wound on stone and glass. It left a wound in the Parisian psyche. People began to doubt. Previously, the railway was a source of pride, a proof that man had conquered space. But after the crash, people whispered, were we too hasty? Was speed a double-edged sword? And above all, that image the locomotive hanging in the open air, white smoke billowing out like the soul of an iron beast, became a symbol. It made Paris, the city of light, suddenly shudder to realize. In that light there is still darkness, right in the heart of progress. Epilogue Paris today. Montparnasse station today is different. Modern glass and steel, towers soaring high above the sky, TGVs rushing in all directions. Rue de Rennes is bustling with traffic. No trace of the broken wall of 1,895 remains. But the memory remains in a famous photograph. The steam locomotive hanging outside the wall, white smoke rising, wheels spinning in midair. The photo became iconic. It not only recorded an accident, but also reminded that industrial ambition always has its limits. A late train, a hasty decision, a weak braking mechanism, and a city shaken. The newspaper woman who died on the street that day is almost forgotten in history books. But it is her death that makes the story more human. Behind the steel, smoke, and fame, there are always small lives that pay the price of progress. Today, as passengers rush through the new station, few remember that autumn afternoon. But in museums, in books, in the memory of Paris, the Montparnasse train still hangs forever, as an immortal symbol of the limits of technology and human fragility.